Autumn, 275 BC. Beneventum, King Pyrrhus of Epirus, stands on a low hill watching his world collapse. For 5 years, he's fought to build an empire in the west, defeated Roman legions at Heraclea, ground them down at Asculum, liberated Sicily from Carthaginian control. But now, in this final battle on Italian soil, he's witnessing the death of his ambitions and the birth of something terrible: Roman invincibility. Below him, his last 6 war elephants, those magnificent beasts that once terrorized Roman cavalry into panicked flight, are dying. Roman soldiers advance with coordinated precision, launching fire arrows that wound the animals and panic them into retreat. Portable barriers channel the elephants' desperate charges into killing zones, where concentrated javelin fire brings them crashing down. Most shocking of all, Roman cavalry is charging, not fleeing in terror as they did at Heraclea when they first encountered these massive creatures, but attacking with disciplined courage, their horses conditioned through months of training to tolerate the elephant's unfamiliar scent and appearance. Pyrrhus watches one elephant, a huge Indian bull that survived Heraclea, Asculum, and 2 years of Sicilian campaigning, take a fire arrow in its eye and trumpet in agony, before trampling through its own supporting infantry in blind panic. He watches Roman cavalry exploit the gap this creates, their lances driving into the flanks of his phalanx formation, where the long sarissas cannot reach. He watches his Epirote professionals, the veteran soldiers he brought from Greece 5 years ago, the men whose discipline and training made them superior to any Italian troops, begin to waver as their flanks collapse, and Roman maniples press forward with the systematic efficiency of men who've learned from their defeats. Adapted. Around him, his officers are shouting contradictory advice: commit the reserves, order tactical withdrawal, attempt one final cavalry charge. But Pyrrhus knows it's over. Not just this battle, his entire Italian venture. He's won every major engagement against Rome, killed tens of thousands of their soldiers, occupied their southern territories, marched to within sight of their capital. And yet somehow, impossibly, Rome is stronger now than when he arrived. They've adapted to his tactics, developed countermeasures for his elephants, improved their equipment and training, replaced their casualties through their vast Italian confederation, while his irreplaceable professionals die one by one. The king who claimed descent from Achilles, who counted Alexander the Great as his second cousin, who dreamed of building a Western empire rivaling the Hellenistic kingdoms of the East, he's learned the hardest lesson of ancient warfare. Tactical brilliance cannot overcome demographic superiority and institutional resilience when enemies refuse to surrender after losing battles. As Roman trumpets sound, the advance and his own officers begin organizing desperate rearguard actions to cover the army's retreat. Pyrrhus remembers his famous words after Asculum 2 years ago: "Another such victory would destroy me." He was right. But to understand how the greatest military mind of his generation came to this moment of defeat, how a king who never lost a battle ultimately lost the war, we must travel back 6 years to the crisis that brought him to Italy and trace the collision between Hellenistic military excellence and Roman institutional power that would determine the future of the Mediterranean world. The year is 282 BC, and in the wealthy Greek city of Tarentum, along the southern Italian coast, a political crisis is brewing that will draw one of antiquity's most celebrated generals into a conflict that tests both civilizations and establishes precedents, influencing warfare for centuries. By 280 BC, Rome had transformed from modest city-state along the Tiber into the dominant power of central Italy through methodical conquest that consumed 3 centuries. The Samnite Wars, 3 brutal conflicts spanning 343 to 290 BC, had broken the mountain tribes who controlled south-central Italy, demonstrating Roman tactical innovation and political genius. But Roman expansion wasn't simple subjugation. They created a complex confederation, binding conquered peoples through varied relationships. Some communities received full Roman citizenship, others obtained Latin rights, still others became allied states with specific military obligations. This pyramid of loyalty channeled the military resources of Italy into Roman hands, while giving conquered peoples stakes in Roman success. By 280 BC, Rome could summon approximately 700,000 men from across the peninsula, a staggering figure, dwarfing the military potential of individual Greek city-states. The Greek colonies of Magna Graecia presented entirely different challenges. These cities, Tarentum, Croton, Sybaris, Rhegium, had been established during the great wave of Greek colonization between the 8th and 6th centuries BC, when land-hungry Greeks sailed west to establish new homes along the fertile coastlines of Sicily and southern Italy. Tarentum, founded by Spartan colonists around 706 BC, had grown into the largest and most powerful of these settlements, controlling a magnificent natural harbor and commanding extensive territories in Apulia and Calabria. The city's wealth came from multiple sources: fertile plains producing grain, olives, and wine in abundance, strategic position along Mediterranean trade routes, famous Tarentine purple dye, extracted from murex shells, prized throughout the known world, craftsmen producing fine pottery, metalwork, and textiles, finding markets from Spain to Asia Minor. The political structure reflected Spartan origins, but had evolved into democracy by the 4th century BC, though one dominated by wealthy merchant families and landowners. The city's assembly, composed of adult male citizens, made major decisions regarding war, peace, and foreign policy, but practical governance often fell to elected magistrates representing elite interests. This democratic system, while providing citizens a voice, also created opportunities for political instability and factional conflict that would prove crucial in the coming crisis. Internal tensions had been building throughout the early 3rd century BC. The city's population included not only Greek citizens, but substantial numbers of native Italians who had been incorporated through conquest or voluntary association groups, enjoying certain rights, but excluded from full political participation, creating potential sources of internal discord. Additionally, the city's wealth had created stark economic disparities, with small elite controlling vast estates and commercial enterprises, while many citizens struggled with debt and limited economic opportunities. The Tarentine elite found themselves caught between competing pressures. On one hand, their wealth and status depended on maintaining independence and the existing political order favoring their interests. On the other hand, rising Roman power presented both threat and opportunity. Some Tarentine leaders advocated accommodation with Rome, arguing cooperation might preserve the city's autonomy while providing protection against other enemies. Others, particularly those with strong ties to the Greek world, viewed Roman expansion as existential threat to Hellenic civilization in Italy and called for resistance at any cost. The crisis that would change everything came in 282 BC, when Roman warships entered the Gulf of Tarentum, in clear violation of the treaty concluded in 303 BC. That agreement had explicitly limited Roman naval operations to areas north of the Licinian promontory, making the appearance of Roman vessels in Tarentine waters a breach of international law. Picture the scene. Tarentine citizens gathered in their theater, watching dramatic performances suddenly interrupted by news that Roman ships, 10 warships flying Roman standards, had sailed brazenly into their sacred harbor. The Democratic Assembly met in emergency session, passions inflamed by demagogues who saw opportunity for advancing their political positions through foreign crisis. The Tarentine response was immediate and catastrophic. Without formal declaration of war, without diplomatic consultation, the city's fleet attacked the Roman squadron. 5 Roman ships were sunk, their crews killed or captured. The commander, a Roman admiral of senatorial rank, was executed. This wasn't border skirmish or diplomatic incident. This was active war against the rising power of Italy, committed by democratic assembly, inflamed by rhetoric, and lacking appreciation for consequences. The Roman reaction was predictably severe. Ambassadors arrived demanding immediate reparations, return of prisoners, punishment of those responsible, payment of indemnities. The Tarentine Assembly, dominated by the war faction that had orchestrated the original attack, rejected these demands with contempt. Roman ambassadors were reportedly insulted, according to some sources. One ambassador's toga was soiled by drunken Tarentine reveler during public assembly, an indignity that Romans considered intolerable affront to their dignity. The factional politics within Tarentum became increasingly desperate as the moderate faction, recognizing the catastrophic danger, lost ground to demagogues, promising that Greek military prowess would easily defeat Roman barbarians. The democratic system that had been Tarentum's pride became its curse, as reasoned strategic analysis was drowned out by passionate speeches appealing to Greek cultural superiority and promises of easy victory. The reality of Tarentum's strategic position was grim. The city, while wealthy and powerful by Greek standards, could not match Rome's demographic advantages or the military resources of the Roman Confederation. Tarentine citizen soldiers, while competent, lacked the systematic training and combat experience of Roman legionaries who had spent decades conquering Italy. The city's navy, though substantial, couldn't project power beyond coastal waters, while Roman land forces could simply march south and besiege the city into submission. The only hope, the desperate gamble that would determine everyone's fate, was foreign intervention. The Greek cities of southern Italy had long maintained connections with the Hellenistic kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean. When Greek colonists faced threats they couldn't handle alone, they traditionally appealed to their mother cities or to powerful rulers who might gain prestige and profit from Western adventures. Tarentum's democratic assembly, after bitter debates that split families and destroyed friendships, voted to send embassy to King Pyrrhus of Epirus, offering him supreme command of their forces and substantial financial support in exchange for military assistance against Rome. The embassy that departed Tarentum in late 281 BC carried more than simple plea for help. They brought detailed intelligence about Roman military capabilities, comprehensive maps of southern Italian terrain, and most importantly, formal authorization to negotiate binding military alliance that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Western Mediterranean. The ambassadors traveled north along the Italian coast to avoid Roman surveillance, then crossed to Corcyra before proceeding to the Epirote mainland. Their journey took weeks, every day bringing news of Roman preparations for invasion, every delay increasing the desperation of their mission. When they finally reached Pyrrhus's court in Ambracia during autumn 281 BC, they found a king whose ambitions and capabilities perfectly matched Tarentum's desperate needs. Pyrrhus of Epirus was then 40 years old in his absolute prime as warrior and commander. He claimed descent through his mother from Achilles himself, the greatest warrior of Greek legend. His paternal line traced back to Neoptolemus, son of Achilles. More significantly for his contemporaries, Pyrrhus was second cousin to Alexander the Great through their shared Aeacid ancestry, a connection shaping both his self-perception and his strategic ambitions throughout his turbulent career. The kingdom of Epirus occupied strategically crucial position along the western coast of the Greek peninsula, controlling the narrow straits between the mainland and the island of Corfu. This mountainous realm, centered on the ancient sanctuary of Dodona, with its oracle of Zeus, had long served as bridge between the Greek world and the barbarian tribes of Illyria to the north. Pyrrhus's early years had been marked by the violent upheavals characterizing the Hellenistic period following Alexander's death. When Pyrrhus was barely 2 years old, his father was driven from the throne by rival nobles. The infant prince was smuggled to safety by loyal retainers who carried him through treacherous mountain passes. In one dramatic moment, they reportedly tied the baby to a spear and hurled him across a raging river to waiting allies. This escape became part of the heroic mythology surrounding Pyrrhus throughout his life. The court of Glaucius, king of the Illyrians, provided young Pyrrhus with his first military education, though it differed significantly from refined Greek instruction he might have received in Epirus. Illyrian warfare emphasized individual prowess, sudden raids, and intimate knowledge of difficult terrain. Warriors were expected to excel in single combat, to endure extreme hardships, and to display absolute loyalty to their war leaders. These lessons, absorbed during his formative years, would later influence Pyrrhus's approach to command, giving him appreciation for personal leadership and tactical flexibility that set him apart from many contemporary Greek generals who relied primarily on rigid formations and conventional strategies. At age 11, Pyrrhus was restored to the Epirot throne through Illyrian military intervention, but his position remained precarious. The young king faced constant threats from Macedonian interference, internal noble factions, and neighboring tribes viewing Epirot weakness as opportunity for territorial expansion. These challenges forced Pyrrhus to develop political skills alongside his military education, learning to balance competing interests while maintaining loyalty of his diverse subjects. By his 20s, Pyrrhus had transformed himself into one of antiquity's most formidable military commanders. His partnership with Demetrius Poliorcetes, the famous besieger of cities, provided invaluable experience in large-scale warfare, while exposing him to latest developments in Hellenistic military technology. Under Demetrius's influence, Pyrrhus observed the effective integration of different military arms, cavalry, infantry, and specialized units that would later characterize his own military reforms. The army that Pyrrhus had built by 280 BC represented the cutting edge of Hellenistic military technology. The backbone remained the traditional Macedonian phalanx, but he'd introduced crucial modifications, reflecting both his personal experiences and specific conditions of Epirot society. His elite phalangites, approximately 3,000 at full strength, were professional soldiers, recruited primarily from Epirot nobility and their retainers, receiving year-round training and generous compensation for their service. These weren't part-time citizen soldiers, these were career warriors whose entire lives centered on military excellence. Each man carried a sarissa, measuring approximately 18 feet in length, a pike so long that when the phalanx formed for battle, the first 5 ranks could present their spear points forward, creating an impenetrable forest of bronze-tipped weapons. They wore bronze breastplate or linothorax reinforced with metal scales, and protected themselves with small shields designed to interfere minimally with pike handling. Bronze helmets, often decorated with distinctive crests identifying specific units, completed their defensive equipment. But Pyrrhus's most revolutionary innovation, the weapon that would terrorize Italian battlefields and force Romans to completely rethink their tactical doctrine, was the war elephant. These massive beasts, obtained through diplomatic and commercial relationships with Ptolemaic Egypt and the Seleucid Empire, were entirely unknown to Western Mediterranean warfare before Pyrrhus's campaigns. Each elephant required extensive support infrastructure, specialized handlers called mahouts, veterinary care, and enormous quantities of fodder, making them expensive assets that only wealthy kingdoms with extensive logistical capabilities could maintain. Picture these creatures, standing nearly 10 feet at the shoulder, weighing 4 tons, their tusks reinforced with bronze caps, wooden towers, called haudas, mounted on their backs, providing elevated platforms for archers and javelin throwers who could engage enemy troops from positions of relative safety. The elephants themselves were trained to charge enemy formations on command, using their bulk and tusks to break through shield walls that could resist conventional cavalry attacks. But the elephant's true power wasn't physical, it was psychological. Horses, unused to their scent and appearance, would panic in their presence, disrupting enemy cavalry formations and making coordinated attacks impossible. Infantry soldiers confronting these massive creatures for the first time frequently broke ranks and fled rather than attempt standing their ground against such unfamiliar opponents. This psychological advantage was particularly valuable in battle's opening phases, when morale and unit cohesion were crucial factors determining outcomes. When the Tarentine ambassadors presented their offer to Pyrrhus in autumn 281 BC, they were speaking to a king whose entire life had been preparation for exactly this moment. His hero was Alexander the Great. His kingdom lacked resources for sustained eastern campaigns against the great Hellenistic powers, but the prospect of leading coalition of Greek cities and Italian tribes against the rising power of Rome offered possibility of establishing Western Empire that could rival the great kingdoms of the East. For king whose lineage traced to Achilles, whose kingdom needed wealth that only foreign conquest could provide, whose ambition demanded theater worthy of his talents, the invitation to intervene in Italian affairs represented chance to achieve lasting fame, while potentially solving his domestic economic problems through the wealth of Magna Graecia. Pyrrhus accepted. The winter crossing from Epirus to Tarentum in early 280 BC represented one of the most logistically complex military operations of the ancient world. Pyrrhus's expedition required coordination of over 300 vessels of varying sizes, from massive grain transports capable of carrying war elephants to swift triremes designed for escort duties. The Epirote king had assembled this diverse fleet through combination of royal resources, Tarentine financial backing, and agreements with independent ship owners who saw profitable opportunities despite obvious risks. The composition of Pyrrhus's invasion force reflected careful consideration of tactical challenges he expected to face in Italy. His core infantry consisted of approximately 16,000 phalangites, organized into 4 tactical units of roughly 4,000 men each, the cream of Epirote military capability. Trained to exacting standards, Pyrrhus had developed through years of warfare against Macedonian and Illyrian opponents. Supporting them were approximately 3,000 peltasts and other light troops, providing tactical flexibility that pure phalanx formations lacked. The cavalry component numbered approximately 3,000 horsemen, representing the military elite of Epirus and allied territories. But the most challenging aspect of the entire transportation effort was the 20 war elephants. Each elephant required individual accommodation aboard specially modified vessels with reinforced hulls capable of supporting weights exceeding 4 tons. The mahouts, primarily Indian and North African specialists, recruited through Ptolemaic contacts, brought detailed knowledge of elephant care and training that would prove essential for maintaining these valuable assets in unfamiliar Italian conditions. Picture the complexity: constructing special ramps for loading elephants onto ships, securing them in reinforced holds, providing adequate fodder and water during potentially weeks-long voyage, managing the animal's stress in confined, unfamiliar environments. The largest specimens obtained through diplomatic exchanges with the Seleucid Empire stood nearly 10 feet at the shoulder and had been trained for battlefield charges against enemy formations. Smaller animals purchased from Ptolemaic dealers served primarily as platforms for archers and javelin throwers. The voyage across the Ionian Sea tested both Pyrrhus's organizational capabilities and the seamanship of his diverse fleet. Winter storms in the eastern Mediterranean were notorious for sudden intensity and destructive power, making the timing of the crossing a calculated risk, balancing military necessity against meteorological uncertainty. Pyrrhus had delayed departure until receiving favorable reports from Tarentine scouts monitoring Roman military movements, but further postponement risked allowing enemy forces to strengthen their positions in southern Italy. The fleet departed from multiple Epiro harbors the main body of infantry sailing from Ambracia under Pyrrhus's personal command, while cavalry units embarked from smaller ports along the coast. This dispersed approach complicated coordination but reduced risk of catastrophic losses if Roman naval forces attempted to intercept the expedition during its most vulnerable phase. Navigation across open waters between Epirus and Italy relied on combination of traditional Greek seamanship and detailed intelligence provided by Tarentine merchants familiar with seasonal weather patterns and coastal conditions. The landing at Tarentum in February 280 BC created immediate sensation that reverberated throughout southern Italy. For the Greek cities of Magna Graecia, the sight of professional Epirot phalangites marching through Tarentine streets represented fulfillment of desperate hopes for effective resistance against Roman expansion. Citizens who had watched Roman power grow with increasing anxiety now saw tangible evidence that their appeals for assistance had produced results that might preserve their independence and cultural identity. The war elephants created particular sensation as reports of their appearance spread through established networks of merchants, travelers, and diplomatic messengers. Most inhabitants of southern Italy had never seen such creatures, making their presence a source of wonder, fear, and speculation about their military capabilities. Detailed descriptions of their size, equipment, and handlers circulated rapidly among both allied and enemy populations, contributing to atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty that would influence subsequent military operations. But Pyrrhus's reception in Tarentum wasn't entirely celebratory. The king recognized immediately that democratic politics and military necessity were incompatible. Within days of his arrival, he implemented martial law throughout the city. Democratic assemblies were suspended, executive authority concentrated in hands of royal appointees, responsible directly to Pyrrhus himself. The city's traditional citizen militia underwent intensive drill designed to familiarize them with phalanx formations and tactical procedures differing significantly from their previous military experience. The training regimen emphasized discipline and unit cohesion over individual prowess, requiring fundamental changes in traditional Greek approaches to warfare that many citizens found difficult to accept. Economic mobilization throughout Tarentum involved systematic conversion of civilian production facilities to military purposes. Workshops that had previously manufactured luxury goods for export were retooled to produce weapons, armor, and military equipment for the expanding Allied forces. Agricultural estates were reorganized to maximize food production, while providing horses and pack animals required for military operations. These changes, while necessary for military effectiveness, disrupted established economic relationships and created hardships for citizens whose livelihoods depended on normal commercial activities. Many Tarentines welcomed the decisive leadership Pyrrhus provided after years of ineffective democratic deliberation, viewing temporary restrictions on political freedom as acceptable price for effective resistance against Roman expansion. Others, particularly among wealthy merchant classes, resented disruption of profitable commercial relationships and concentration of authority in foreign hands. The presence of Epirot soldiers throughout the city created additional tensions, reflecting cultural differences between the disciplined professionalism of Pyrrhus's army and the more relaxed traditions of Greek civic life. News of Pyrrhus's arrival spread rapidly throughout southern Italy, creating ripple effects influencing political and military calculations in communities throughout the region. Greek cities that had remained neutral began reconsidering their positions as prospect of effective resistance became more realistic. Italian tribes that had submitted to Roman authority started questioning whether continued cooperation served their long-term interests given the changing military balance. Roman intelligence networks provided Consul Laevinus with detailed reports of Pyrrhus's landing within days of the event. These accounts revealed not only the size and composition of the Epirot expedition, but also valuable information about enemy morale, equipment quality, and tactical organization. Roman commanders had extensive experience analyzing foreign military capabilities, but Pyrrhus represented qualitatively different challenge than the tribal levies and Greek city militias they had previously encountered. Laevinus's initial response demonstrated strategic flexibility characterizing Roman expansion throughout Italy. Rather than attempting immediate confrontation with enemy forces still organizing after their sea voyage, the consul concentrated his available legions in defensive positions, protecting Roman allies, while gathering intelligence about enemy intentions and capabilities. The Roman force available consisted of approximately 35,000 men, organized into 4 legions, plus supporting allied contingents, substantial portion of Rome's total military capability, reflecting the seriousness with which Roman leaders viewed the threat. The manipular organization characterizing Roman tactical doctrine differed fundamentally from the phalanx formations employed by Pyrrhus. Roman legions were organized into smaller, more flexible units called maniples, each containing 120 men arranged in loose formations that could adapt to varying terrain conditions while maintaining mutual support. This system emphasized individual soldier training and small unit leadership, rather than the mass coordination required for effective phalanx warfare. Roman equipment reflected practical considerations developed through extensive combat experience. Legionaries carried the gladius, a short stabbing sword, designed for close-quarters combat, along with javelins called pila that could penetrate enemy shields and armor at medium ranges. Their defensive equipment included oval shields, large enough to provide substantial protection while remaining light enough for extended maneuvering, supplemented by bronze helmets and mail shirts, offering reasonable protection without excessive weight. This was the tactical collision brewing. The disciplined mass of the Macedonian phalanx, with its 18-foot sarissas and bronze-armored professionals, against the flexible maniples of Roman legionaries, with their short swords designed for individual combat. Greek military excellence, refined over centuries against Hellenistic warfare's psychological terror weapons, versus Roman adaptability, proven through decades of Italian conquest. Professional soldiers whose entire lives centered on military perfection, against citizen soldiers whose tactical system emphasized flexibility and individual initiative. And most dramatically, war elephants, creatures of nightmare that Western Mediterranean had never encountered in battle, against Roman cavalry and infantry, who would face them for the first time at a place called Heraclea. The spring of 280 BC was approaching, and with it, the battle that would test whether Hellenistic military supremacy could overcome Roman institutional resilience and demographic advantages. Pyrrhus had never lost a battle. Rome had never accepted defeat as final. Something had to give. The Roman advance toward Heraclea in spring 280 BC represented Consul Laevinus's calculated attempt to force decisive engagement before Pyrrhus could fully consolidate his position in southern Italy. Intelligence reports indicated additional Greek cities were wavering in their loyalty to Rome, while Samnite and Lucanian tribal leaders had begun mobilizing their warriors in anticipation of coordinated action against Roman positions. Laevinus recognized that allowing the enemy coalition additional time to organize would only strengthen their position, while potentially encouraging further defections among Rome's Italian allies. The Roman army that marched south from Venusia consisted of 4 legions, totaling approximately 35,000 men, a force representing substantial portion of Rome's available military strength. Laevinus had positioned his most experienced legions in the vanguard, the 3 and IV legions leading the advance, while the I and II legions provided security for the army's flanks and supply train. The army advanced in multiple columns, separated by sufficient distance to prevent single enemy attack from disrupting the entire force, while maintaining close enough proximity for mutual support if circumstances required rapid concentration. Pyrrhus's response to reports of the Roman advance revealed his tactical acumen and deep understanding of psychological factors influencing ancient warfare. Rather than attempting to intercept the enemy during their march when Roman formations would be at maximum readiness, the Epirot king chose to establish defensive positions near Heraclea that would force Romans to attack under disadvantageous circumstances while maximizing the shock effect of his war elephants on troops, encountering them for the first time. The selection of Heraclea as the battle site reflected careful consideration of terrain features favoring Pyrrhus's tactical methods, while minimizing Roman advantages in flexibility and unit coordination. The plain near the city provided sufficient space for deploying phalanx formations in their traditional dense arrangements, while the nearby Cirrus River offered opportunities for tactical maneuver. Hills on the northern edge of the battlefield provided elevated positions for observation and potential flanking movements. Pyrrhus's army at Heraclea numbered approximately 25,000 men, representing the diverse coalition he'd assembled during his first months in Italy. The corps consisted of 16,000 Epirot phalangites organized into 4 tactical divisions, each commanded by experienced officers who had served in previous campaigns. These professional soldiers formed the backbone of Pyrrhus's battle line, their bronze armor gleaming in the morning sun as they assumed positions with mechanical precision, characterizing well-trained phalanx formations. Supporting the Epirot infantry were approximately 4,000 Tarentine and allied Greek troops, whose recent training under Pyrrhus's supervision had improved their military capabilities, while revealing limitations imposed by lack of extensive combat experience. These citizen soldiers, equipped with weapons and armor produced in Tarentine workshops, demonstrated enthusiasm for the coming battle that partially compensated for their tactical inexperience. The Italian tribal contingents, roughly 5,000 warriors from various Samnite and Lucanian communities, brought fighting skills developed through generations of warfare against Roman expansion, armed with javelins, long swords, and oval shields decorated with tribal emblems. Pyrrhus's cavalry force of 3,000 horsemen represented the military elite of his coalition, drawn from warrior aristocracies of Epirus, Tarentum, and allied Italian tribes. These mounted warriors carried long lances designed for shock combat along with swords for close-quarters fighting, their horses carefully selected and trained to remain steady in the presence of war elephants. But the 20 war elephants, positioned at key points throughout Pyrrhus's formation, constituted his most psychologically effective weapon against an enemy that had never encountered such creatures in combat. Each elephant carried a wooden tower containing 2 or 3 warriors armed with javelins and bows, while the animals themselves had been trained to use their tusks and bulk to break through enemy shield walls. The Mahouts possessed intimate knowledge of their animals' capabilities and limitations that would prove crucial during the coming engagement. The Roman approach to the battlefield on the morning of battle revealed both confidence and caution, characterizing their military doctrine. Laevinus deployed his legions in the traditional triplex aces formation, Hastati in the front line, Principes in the second, and Triarii in reserve. This arrangement provided tactical flexibility while maintaining unit cohesion that had proven effective against various Italian opponents. Roman cavalry, approximately 1,200 horsemen, drawn primarily from allied communities, took positions on both flanks where they could protect the infantry from enemy-mounted attacks while remaining available for pursuit. Operations if battle developed favorably. The initial Roman advance across the plain toward Pyrrhus's positions demonstrated the disciplined movement characterizing legionary warfare. Each maniple maintained its assigned position within the larger formation while adapting to minor terrain variations. Centurions moved constantly among their men, issuing orders and maintaining steady pace that would bring them into javelin range without exhausting soldiers before combat began. Roman light troops advancing ahead of the main battle line engaged their Greek and Italian counterparts in preliminary skirmishing that typically preceded major engagements. These encounters, while limited in scope, provided both sides with valuable intelligence about enemy morale and tactical organization. Then the Romans saw them, war elephants, 20 massive creatures advancing slowly but inexorably toward the Roman lines. Most Roman soldiers had heard rumors, fantastical stories from merchants and travelers about enormous beasts used in Eastern warfare, but nothing prepared them for the reality. These weren't exaggerated tales. These were living mountains of flesh and muscle, each standing nearly 10 feet at the shoulder, their tusks reinforced with bronze caps, wooden towers on their backs, carrying warriors who looked down on the battlefield like gods. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Roman cavalry, horses on both flanks, well-trained animals accustomed to the noise and chaos of battle, caught the elephant's unfamiliar scent and went mad with terror. Horses reared and bolted despite their riders' desperate efforts to maintain control. Cavalry formations that had been preparing to protect the legion's flanks dissolved into chaos as hundreds of panicked animals threw their riders and fled toward the rear. The carefully planned Roman tactical deployment, designed around cavalry, protecting infantry flanks, while maintaining flexibility for pursuit, collapsed within minutes of first encountering Pyrrhus's secret weapon. Picture the horror for Roman cavalry commanders. Their entire force rendered useless not by enemy action, but by their horses' instinctive terror. Warriors who had spent years mastering mounted combat techniques reduced to helpless spectators as their mounts fled in panic. The few cavalrymen who managed to approach the elephants found their weapons ineffective against the animals' thick hides, while warriors in the towers above rained javelins down upon them with deadly accuracy. Laevinus recognized the crisis developing on his wings and attempted to reinforce positions with allied infantry. But these troops proved equally vulnerable to elephant attacks when their supporting cavalry had been eliminated. The collapse of Roman cavalry created opportunities for Pyrrhus's horsemen to attack the main legionary formation from unexpected directions, exactly the tactical nightmare Roman commanders had hoped to avoid. The central engagement between Roman maniples and Pyrrhus's phalanx revealed the fundamental differences between these tactical systems. Roman legionaries trained to fight as individuals within small unit frameworks found themselves confronting a wall of 18-foot pikes, preventing them from closing to the range where their short swords would be effective. The gladius, designed for thrusting attacks in close combat, proved inadequate against opponents who could engage from distances Roman weapons couldn't match. Pyrrhus's phalangites, advancing in their traditional dense formation, presented formidable obstacle that Roman tactical methods hadn't been designed to overcome. The sarissas held at various angles created multiple layers of spear points, an impenetrable barrier, channeling Roman attacks into predetermined killing zones where concentrated missile fire could inflict maximum casualties. The bronze armor worn by the front ranks provided substantial protection against Roman javelins and sword thrusts, while the depth of the formation ensured that casualties could be replaced without disrupting overall unit cohesion. Roman attempts to adapt revealed both their tactical flexibility and the limitations of their current military system. Individual centurions attempted to coordinate attacks against specific sections of the enemy line, hoping to create gaps that could be exploited by follow-up assaults. Some Roman units tried to overlap the flanks of phalanx blocks, seeking to attack from angles where the long pikes would be less effective. But these improvised tactics required coordination that was difficult to achieve in the noise and confusion of battle, while the presence of elephants on the flanks made such maneuvers suicidally dangerous. The effectiveness of war elephants in disrupting Roman formations became increasingly apparent as battle progressed. The animals, advancing under protection of supporting infantry, created chaos wherever they appeared. Roman soldiers, who had never encountered such creatures, found their training inadequate for dealing with opponents combining massive size with intelligent direction from their handlers. Some legionaries attempted to wound the animals by targeting their legs and feet with their pila, while others tried to kill or disable the mahouts controlling them. A few discovered that fire could frighten the elephants, leading to improvised attempts to create flaming missiles. But these desperate measures achieved limited success against well-trained animals and experienced handlers who'd anticipated such tactics. The battle's turning point came when Pyrrhus personally led a cavalry charge against the Roman right wing, which had been weakened by redeployment of troops to counter elephant attacks on the opposite flank. Picture the moment: the Epirot king, recognizable by his distinctive armor and royal insignia, claiming descent from Achilles himself, riding at the head of his elite cavalry squadrons in a charge demonstrating both his personal courage and tactical acumen. The sight of their commander leading from the front inspired Pyrrhus's entire army, while creating additional pressure on Roman forces already struggling with unfamiliar tactical challenges. The Roman right wing, composed primarily of allied troops from recently conquered territories, began to waver under the combined pressure of cavalry attacks and advancing phalanx formations. These soldiers, while competent, lacked the experience and motivation of veteran Roman legionaries, making them vulnerable to the psychological warfare Pyrrhus had perfected through years of campaigning. The collapse of allied units created gaps in the Roman line that Pyrrhus's forces were quick to exploit, Greek and Italian warriors pouring through the breaches, attacking Roman formations from multiple directions simultaneously. Laevinus's attempts to restore the situation by committing his triarii reserves demonstrated both the flexibility of Roman tactical doctrine and its limitations when confronting unfamiliar opponents. The veteran soldiers of the third line, equipped with long spears rather than the standard gladius and pilum combination, were better suited for engaging phalanx formations than their younger colleagues. However, their limited numbers and the multiple crises developing simultaneously across the battlefield made it impossible for them to restore Roman fortunes single-handedly. The final phase saw a gradual collapse of Roman resistance, as cumulative casualties and tactical disadvantages made continued fighting untenable. The loss of cavalry had eliminated Roman ability to protect their flanks or conduct organized withdrawals, while the effectiveness of enemy elephants had disrupted the unit cohesion essential for manipular tactics. Individual Roman formations continued fighting with characteristic stubbornness, centurions rallying their men, veterans refusing to retreat, despite impossible odds. But the overall battle had been decided by factors beyond their control. Roman casualties at Heraclea were severe, approximately 7,000 killed and 2,000 captured from Laevinus's original force of 35,000 men. These figures reflected the devastating effectiveness of coordinated phalanx and elephant attacks against troops encountering such methods for the first time. The loss of experienced centurions and veteran soldiers represented a particularly serious blow to Roman military capabilities. These men's knowledge and leadership couldn't be easily replaced even with Rome's demographic advantages. Pyrrhus's losses, while significant, were proportionally lighter. Approximately 4,000 men from his coalition forces were killed or wounded, with heaviest casualties occurring among the Epirot phalangites, who had borne the brunt of Roman attacks. The death of several experienced officers, including some of Pyrrhus's closest advisors, highlighted the risks inherent in the aggressive tactics that had won the battle, but at considerable cost to the army's leadership structure. The immediate strategic consequences of Heraclea extended far beyond the casualties suffered by both armies. For Rome, the defeat represented their first major setback since conclusion of the Samnite Wars and raised serious questions about their ability to resist foreign intervention in Italian affairs. The loss of prestige associated with military defeat threatened to encourage defections among allied communities that had submitted to Roman authority primarily because of their reputation for invincibility. Several Latin colonies in southern Italy began reconsidering their loyalty following news of the defeat, while tribal leaders who had remained neutral started exploring opportunities for joining the anti-Roman coalition. For Pyrrhus and his coalition, victory at Heraclea provided validation of their strategy, while creating new opportunities for expanding their anti-Roman alliance. Greek cities throughout Magna Graecia that had hesitated to commit themselves now saw evidence that effective resistance to Roman expansion was possible with proper leadership and resources. The demonstration of war elephants' effectiveness encouraged tribal leaders to believe that coordinated action might achieve what individual resistance had failed to accomplish. But as Pyrrhus surveyed the battlefield, the dead and wounded scattered across the plain, his war elephants exhausted from combat, his Epirot professionals having suffered casualties that couldn't be easily replaced, he reportedly made an observation to one of his officers that would echo through history. If we win another such victory against the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined. The officer, not understanding the significance, congratulated the king on his triumph. Pyrrhus shook his head. He'd won the battle decisively, killed thousands of Romans, captured their standards, driven their army from the field. But he'd lost men he couldn't replace, professional soldiers whose training and experience took years to develop. Rome, with its vast Italian confederation, could summon 700,000 men. They could replace every soldier lost at Heraclea 10 times over. He could not. This was the terrible arithmetic of the Pyrrhic War revealing itself. Tactical brilliance versus demographic superiority. Professional excellence versus institutional resilience. Individual genius versus collective determination. Pyrrhus had won the first round, but the war was far from over. The diplomatic triumph achieved by Cineas in Rome during summer 280 BC represented Pyrrhus's attempt to transform military victory into lasting political settlement. Cineas, a Thessalian noble who had served as Pyrrhus's chief advisor for several years, possessed extensive knowledge of Roman political institutions and diplomatic practices essential for conducting effective negotiations. His reputation for eloquence and intellectual sophistication made him ideal choice for representing Hellenistic civilization to Roman audiences who might be unfamiliar with Greek diplomatic traditions. The embassy's journey to Rome occurred when news of Heraclea had already reached the city and created intense debate about appropriate responses to the military crisis. Cineas traveled with substantial retinue that included not only diplomatic personnel, but also carefully selected prisoners of war whose treatment would demonstrate Pyrrhus's magnanimity while providing opportunities for informal communication with Roman leaders. Picture Cineas's reception in Rome, the Greek diplomat in his finest robes, speaking flawless Latin mixed with carefully chosen Greek phrases, presenting Pyrrhus's terms with eloquence designed to appeal to both Roman pride and practical self-interest. The proposals were generous by ancient standards. Pyrrhus would withdraw from Roman territories in exchange for Roman recognition of Greek independence in southern Italy. All prisoners would be returned without ransom. Future disputes would be resolved through arbitration rather than warfare. It was reasonable, moderate, designed to give both sides honorable exit from conflict that could drain them both. The Senate debate that followed revealed deep divisions within Roman leadership about how to respond to foreign intervention and military defeat. Moderate voices, recognizing the serious military challenges posed by professional Hellenistic warfare, advocated tactical concessions that might preserve Roman interests while avoiding catastrophic losses that could result from continued resistance. These senators argued that temporary territorial adjustments in southern Italy represented acceptable costs for maintaining Roman control over their more valuable possessions in central Italy and preventing formation of permanent anti-Roman coalitions. But then rose Appius Claudius Caecus the Blind, carried into the Senate chamber on a litter, because his aged body and sightless eyes could no longer manage the walk unaided. This elderly statesman, whose earlier career had included major engineering projects, the Appian Way bore his name, and military campaigns, possessed moral authority transcending factional divisions within the Senate. Picture the scene: absolute silence falling as the old man was carried in. Senators who had been arguing passionately moments before, now sitting respectfully, the blind statesman's voice still strong despite his physical infirmities beginning to speak. His words cut through the diplomatic niceties like a sword. What disgrace was this? Rome, which had never negotiated with enemies while their armies remained on Italian soil, now considering terms from a foreign adventurer whose very presence was insult to Roman dignity. Pyrrhus claimed he came to liberate Greek cities, but what gave this Epirote king, this descendant of bandits and mountain raiders, the right to dictate to Rome about Italian affairs? Rome had built its power through centuries of struggle, had defeated Samnites and Latins and every tribe that challenged them, and now, after one lost battle, they would surrender everything to foreign threats. Appius Claudius's speech emphasized that Roman military setbacks resulted from unfamiliarity with enemy tactics rather than fundamental weaknesses in Roman military capabilities. The elephants, the phalanx formations, the professional soldiers, these were surprises, yes, but surprises Rome could adapt to, overcome, defeat. Roman history was a story of adaptation and perseverance, of learning from defeats and returning stronger. To negotiate now, while enemy forces occupied Italian territory, would establish dangerous precedent, encouraging future interventions. Every ambitious Hellenistic king, every would-be Alexander, would see Rome as target for easy conquest if they showed weakness now. The moral dimension of his argument proved even more powerful. Roman dignitas, their reputation, their honor, their fundamental identity as a people who never surrendered, was at stake. What would their ancestors think? What would their children say? That the generation of Appius Claudius Caecus had sold Roman honor for temporary peace? That they had betrayed centuries of struggle because they feared one foreign king with his exotic beasts and mercenary soldiers? Never. Rome would fight. Rome would adapt. Rome would prevail. The Senate's response to Appius Claudius's speech was thunderous applause, followed by formal rejection of Pyrrhus's peace terms. Cineas, despite his diplomatic skill and eloquent presentation, had failed to achieve his objective. He returned to Pyrrhus with disturbing news. Rome would not negotiate while foreign forces remained in Italy. Roman confidence hadn't been shaken by Heraclea, if anything. Defeat had strengthened their resolve to resist. Pyrrhus' response to Rome's diplomatic rejection was characteristically bold. If Rome refused reasonable terms after one defeat, perhaps they needed a more dramatic demonstration of his military capabilities. The decision to march north through Latium toward Rome itself represented both logical culmination of his Italian strategy and the most audacious gamble of his military career. By threatening the Roman capital directly, he hoped to compel serious reconsideration of his terms, while demonstrating to Italian allies that Roman power wasn't as invincible as they'd been led to believe. The preparation for Pyrrhus's northern campaign required extensive reorganization following Heraclea's costly victory. His army had grown substantially through recruitment of allied contingents from Greek cities and Italian tribes, approximately 8,000 additional Greek infantry from Tarentum, Locri, and other allied cities, plus roughly 12,000 Samnite and Lucanian tribal levies. But these additions created new logistical challenges, while diluting the professional quality characterizing his original Epirot expedition. The logistical requirements for moving this expanded army of nearly 40,000 men through mountainous terrain between southern Italy and Rome presented challenges, testing even Pyrrhus's considerable organizational capabilities. Each war elephant required approximately 300 pounds of fodder daily, along with substantial quantities of water that might not be readily available during extended marches through arid regions. The army's baggage train had expanded proportionately with the addition of Allied contingents, creating vulnerable column that stretched for several miles and moved at pace of its slowest components. The march itself began in early spring of 279 BC, time to take advantage of improving weather conditions while avoiding summer heat that would create additional hardships for both men and animals. Pyrrhus organized his army into multiple columns that could move independently while maintaining mutual support, reducing vulnerability that would result from concentrating all forces in single formation. The psychological impact of Pyrrhus's advance reverberated throughout central Italy. Roman colonies established in conquered territories found themselves isolated and vulnerable, their garrisons insufficient to resist determined siege, while too valuable to abandon without major political consequences. Many colonial administrators began evacuating non-essential personnel, while strengthening fortifications and stockpiling supplies for potential sieges. The loyalty of recently conquered Italian communities faced severe testing as Pyrrhus's forces approached their territories. Tribal leaders who had submitted to Roman authority primarily from necessity rather than conviction began reconsidering their positions as military balance shifted. Secret negotiations between Pyrrhus's representatives and local chieftains created opportunities for coordinated uprisings that could isolate Roman garrisons while providing the invading army with additional manpower and local comtus. Knowledge. Roman defensive strategy developed in response demonstrated sophisticated understanding of their enemy's capabilities and limitations. Consul Marcus Curius Dentatus, commanding forces responsible for defending central Italy, concentrated his forces in fortified positions that could withstand siege while threatening enemy supply lines. The strategy emphasized attrition and delay, recognizing that Pyrrhus's coalition would become increasingly difficult to maintain as the campaign extended beyond its initial objectives. But as Pyrrhus approached the outskirts of Roman territory in late spring 279 BC, the logistical challenges that had been manageable in southern Italy became critical problems. The war elephants, stressed by unfamiliar climate conditions and irregular feeding schedules, began showing signs of illness, threatening their combat effectiveness. Several animals developed foot problems from extended marching on rocky terrain, while others exhibited behavioral changes that made them dangerous to their own handlers and nearby troops. Supply difficulties reflected both the scale of Pyrrhus's logistical requirements and the effectiveness of Roman defensive preparations. Local communities intimidated by Roman threats of retaliation proved reluctant to provide the quantities of grain, fodder, and other supplies necessary for maintaining such large army during extended operations. The army's foraging activities, while successful in meeting immediate needs, created hostile relationships with Italian populations whose support would be essential for any permanent political settlement. Intelligence reports reaching Pyrrhus during his advance indicated that Roman military preparations were proceeding more rapidly than anticipated, with substantial reinforcements being concentrated in defensive positions along his projected route. The mobilization of Roman reserves, combined with arrival of Allied contingents from throughout central Italy, suggested that any assault on Roman positions would encounter significantly stronger resistance than originally calculated. As Pyrrhus approached within 40 miles of Rome itself, close enough that his soldiers could see smoke from the city's fires, on clear days, he faced a strategic dilemma. His forces were exhausted from the extended march, his elephants showing signs of stress, his supplies running low, and Roman defensive positions growing stronger every day. The psychological impact of threatening Rome had been achieved. Italian communities understood that Roman protection wasn't guaranteed. Roman allies questioned their loyalty, but the cost of actually besieging the capital would be catastrophic for his limited resources. The decision to withdraw from Rome's gates in summer 279 BC marked critical turning point. Though Pyrrhus skillfully presented his strategic retreat as tactical repositioning designed to consolidate gains rather than acknowledge defeat, the failure to force decisive political settlement through military pressure exposed fundamental weaknesses in his strategic position. Rome's refusal to negotiate, despite foreign army camping on their doorstep, demonstrated institutional resilience that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. The return to southern Italy during autumn 279 BC should have been opportunity to reorganize and prepare for renewed operations. Instead, Pyrrhus faced growing tensions with his Greek allies and disturbing intelligence from multiple fronts. The harsh treatment he'd imposed on Tarentum to create military efficiency was generating resentment among populations accustomed to democratic self-governance. The economic strain of supporting his army, the requisitions, the taxes, the disrupted trade, was creating opposition among precisely those social groups whose support was essential for long-term stability. Then came news that changed everything. An embassy from Syracuse. The situation in Sicily had become desperate. The great Greek city, once the most powerful in the Western Mediterranean, faced systematic Carthaginian conquest that threatened to eliminate Greek independence on the island entirely. Carthaginian forces controlled most of western Sicily, including the crucial fortress of Lilybaeum, and were advancing steadily toward Syracuse itself. The Syracusan embassy offered Pyrrhus supreme command of their forces, substantial financial support, and the prospect of liberating all of Greek Sicily from Carthaginian domination. For Pyrrhus, the Sicilian invitation offered escape from the strategic stalemate in Italy, while presenting opportunities that perfectly matched his ambitions and capabilities. Sicily's wealth far exceeded that of Magna Graecia. Its grain production could feed massive armies. Its strategic position controlled trade routes between eastern and western Mediterranean. And most significantly, the Carthaginians, while numerous and well-equipped, lacked the tactical sophistication and professional training characterizing Roman legions. They relied heavily on mercenary contingents recruited from throughout the Mediterranean, creating potential vulnerabilities in unit cohesion and long-term reliability that skilled commanders could exploit. The Carthaginians had no war elephants in Sicily, no phalanx formations, no professional soldiers who'd spent years training in coordinated tactics. This would be easier than fighting Rome, or so Pyrrhus calculated. The decision to accept the Syracusan invitation required leaving substantial forces in Italy to maintain his alliances while preventing Roman exploitation of his absence. But the prospect of achieving decisive victory in Sicily, of potentially establishing Western Empire that could rival the Hellenistic kingdoms of the East, proved too tempting to resist. The crossing from Rhegium to Messina in early 278 BC transferred approximately 8,000 of his most experienced Epirote phalangites, along with 3,000 light troops and 500 cavalry. Only 8 war elephants accompanied the Sicilian expedition, reflecting both transportation challenges and the need to maintain defensive capabilities in Italy. The initial reception Pyrrhus received in Syracuse exceeded even optimistic expectations. The city's population, desperate for effective leadership after years of ineffective resistance to Carthaginian expansion, welcomed the Epirot king, with celebrations rivaling those traditionally reserved for victorious Olympic athletes. The sight of professional phalangites marching through Syracuse's streets provided tangible evidence that effective resistance had become possible through foreign military assistance. And Pyrrhus delivered. His first major engagement occurred at Heraclea Manoa, where a Carthaginian force of approximately 8,000 men had established positions threatening communications between Syracuse and remaining independent Greek cities. The battle, fought on terrain favoring phalanx formations over the loose tactical arrangements preferred by Carthaginian mercenaries, resulted in decisive victory that eliminated enemy threats to eastern Sicily while capturing substantial quantities of military equipment and supplies. The psychological impact reverberated throughout the island. The siege of Panormus represented Pyrrhus's first major test against heavily fortified Carthaginian position defended by substantial garrison forces. His engineers, trained in methods developed by Alexander's successors, constructed elaborate siege works, including towers, battering rams, and catapults, designed to breach the defensive fortifications. The coordinated use of artillery, mining operations, and direct assault techniques created multiple simultaneous threats that overwhelmed the defenders' ability to respond effectively. The fall of Panormus, after siege of only 6 weeks, provided major strategic victory while capturing one of the most important commercial centers in western Sicily. The rapid succession of victories that followed revealed both the effectiveness of Pyrrhus's military methods and fundamental weaknesses in Carthaginian defensive arrangements. Segesta, Eryx, and numerous smaller fortified positions surrendered rather than face the siege techniques that had proven so effective against Panormus. By the end of 278 BC, Carthaginian forces had been driven from all of eastern and central Sicily, retaining only the fortress of Lilybaeum and a few minor coastal positions, remaining secure due to their naval connections with North African bases. Pyrrhus had achieved in 1 year what Syracusan forces had failed to accomplish in decades of warfare. But the very completeness of his military success created new challenges that would ultimately undermine his position. The rapid elimination of external threats reduced the sense of urgency that had initially motivated Greek cooperation with his authority. The authoritarian methods he'd employed to achieve military efficiency began generating resentment among populations accustomed to democratic self-governance. The concentration of power in royal hands, justified by military necessity during the crisis, became increasingly difficult to maintain as immediate Carthaginian threat receded. The administrative reforms Pyrrhus implemented throughout liberated Sicily reflected his understanding that military success required political consolidation. Traditional democratic assemblies were suspended or severely restricted. Executive power concentrated in hands of royal appointees, responsible directly to Pyrrhus himself. Economic mobilization involved systematic conversion of Sicilian resources to support his military objectives. Agricultural production reorganized to maximize grain exports, urban workshops converted to produce military equipment, harbor facilities modernized and expanded. The taxation systems created particular resentment among wealthy merchant classes who had previously enjoyed substantial autonomy in their commercial activities. Royal monopolies on certain luxury goods and standardization of weights and measures, while improving administrative efficiency, disrupted established trading relationships and reduced the profits that had traditionally supported Greek urban civilization. These economic pressures, combined with political restrictions on democratic participation, created growing opposition among precisely those social groups whose support was essential for long-term stability. But the siege of Lilybaeum, the culmination of Pyrrhus's Sicilian strategy, proved the test that broke his campaign. The fortress city's position on its peninsula made conventional siege approaches extremely difficult, while its naval connections with North Africa ensured that Carthaginian reinforcements and supplies could continue reaching the garrison despite land-based blockade efforts. Massive earthworks were constructed to provide protected approaches to the city walls, while specialized siege engines were assembled to breach the multiple defensive barriers protecting the urban core. The logistical requirements for maintaining thousands of soldiers during extended siege created unprecedented demands on Sicilian agricultural and commercial resources. But the naval blockade revealed limitations of Greek naval capabilities when confronted by sophisticated Carthaginian maritime technology. Carthaginian ships, designed specifically for open ocean warfare, possessed advantages in speed and maneuverability that made effective blockade operations extremely difficult. The arrival of Carthaginian relief expeditions from North Africa repeatedly broke through Greek naval cordons, resupplying the Lilybaeum garrison while demonstrating continuing vitality of Carthaginian resistance. The prolonged nature of the siege gradually undermined both military effectiveness of Pyrrhus's forces and political stability of his Sicilian administration. The enormous costs associated with maintaining siege operations strained the island's economic resources while creating hardships for civilian populations whose agricultural production had been disrupted by military requirements. The apparent invulnerability of the Carthaginian fortress began generating doubts about Pyrrhus's military capabilities, while encouraging his opponents to believe that continued resistance might eventually produce favorable results. The growing opposition throughout Sicily reflected both specific grievances created by his authoritarian methods and broader cultural tensions between Hellenistic monarchical traditions and the democratic values that had characterized Greek civilization for centuries. Wealthy landowners resented the economic controls that had reduced their traditional autonomy, while urban populations complained about restrictions on political participation that had eliminated their influence over policy decisions. The suspension of traditional festivals and cultural activities justified by military necessity created additional sources of popular discontent that Carthaginian agents were quick to exploit. Then came the intelligence that would force Pyrrhus's hand. Urgent dispatches from Italy during winter, 277 to 276 BC, carried devastating news. Roman forces, taking advantage of his absence, had begun systematic operations against his remaining allies. Several key fortified positions had fallen to Roman assault, while tribal leaders, who had previously supported the anti-Roman coalition, were negotiating separate peace agreements, threatening to isolate the remaining Greek cities. The strategic situation that confronted Pyrrhus as he contemplated abandoning the Sicilian campaign was grim. His forces in Sicily, while still formidable, had been reduced through combat losses, disease, and desertion to approximately 12,000 effective soldiers, including only 6,000 of his original Epirote professionals. The prolonged siege operations against Lilybaeum had consumed enormous quantities of equipment and supplies, while producing no tangible strategic gains. The war elephants that had survived the Sicilian campaign numbered only 6 animals, their handlers reporting various health problems, reflecting stress of extended operations. The decision to abandon Sicily required careful coordination to prevent Carthaginian forces from intercepting his withdrawal. The evacuation began during summer 275 BC, utilizing combination of Tarentine vessels and captured Carthaginian ships modified for troop transport duties. The operation required multiple voyages to transfer all personnel and equipment safely, but the systematic withdrawal proceeded without major incident. The landing at Locri in late summer 275 BC provided Pyrrhus with his first direct assessment of the deteriorated strategic situation in Italy. Roman forces had conducted systematic raids throughout the region, destroying agricultural installations and capturing livestock in operations designed to undermine economic support for the anti-Roman coalition. Local officials reported that Roman tactical doctrine had evolved significantly during his absence. Legions reorganized and re-equipped with improved weapons, specifically designed to counter phalanx formations and war elephant attacks. The intelligence briefings revealed that Roman anti-elephant preparations had achieved particular sophistication. Specialized units trained in coordinated tactics designed to neutralize these psychologically effective weapons. Various devices, including fire arrows and barbed spears, portable obstacles that could channel elephant charges into predetermined killing zones. Most significantly, Roman cavalry horses had undergone extensive conditioning programs, enabling them to operate effectively in the presence of war. Elephants eliminating one of the primary tactical advantages these creatures had provided. Pyrrhus faced the terrible reality. His 2 years Sicilian diversion had allowed Rome to adapt, to learn, to prepare. The tactical surprises that had won him Heraclea were no longer surprises. The psychological weapons that had panicked Roman cavalry were now familiar, manageable, counterable, and his army, depleted by years of campaigning across 2 theaters, reduced to approximately 20,000 men, including only 8,000 Epiro professionals, with just 6 war elephants remaining, would face a Roman force that had grown stronger, more experienced, more confident. While he'd been chasing Carthaginians around Sicily, the final confrontation was approaching, and this time, the Romans were ready. The Roman army that Pyrrhus would face upon his return to Italy represented the most formidable force the Republic had ever assembled for operations in the southern peninsula. Consul Manius Curius Dentatus commanded approximately 45,000 men, organized into 5 legions, plus extensive allied contingents drawn from throughout central Italy. This force reflected both the demographic advantages Rome possessed through its Italian confederation and the military lessons learned through 3 years of warfare against professional Hellenistic opponents. The composition demonstrated significant improvements in equipment and training, addressing specific challenges posed by Pyrrhus's tactical methods. Each legion included expanded numbers of light troops equipped with specialized anti-elephant weapons, while heavy infantry units had received additional spears designed to engage phalanx formations at greater distances. Roman cavalry had been reorganized into larger squadrons capable of coordinated maneuvers, their horses having undergone conditioning programs, eliminating the panic responses characterizing previous encounters with war elephants. Roman logistical capabilities had also undergone substantial improvements during Pyrrhus's absence. Supply systems designed to support extended operations in hostile territory, while maintaining secure communications with bases throughout central Italy, now included mobile workshops accompanying each legion to provide equipment maintenance and replacement services, while medical units had been expanded and professionalized to handle casualties associated with intensive combat operations. The strategic positioning that Dentatus had established throughout southern Italy demonstrated sophisticated understanding of terrain features and communication routes that would influence the developing campaign. Roman forces occupied fortified positions, controlling primary routes between coast and interior regions, while advanced detachments monitored potential landing sites where enemy reinforcements might arrive. The selection of Beneventum as the site for what would prove the decisive engagement reflected both strategic necessity and tactical opportunity. The city's position controlled the primary route between Roman territories and the Greek cities of the coast, making it essential for maintaining communications, regardless of which side ultimately controlled the position. The surrounding terrain offered advantages for both phalanx formations and manipular tactics, creating conditions where superior leadership and troop quality would likely determine the engagement's outcome. The approach march that brought Pyrrhus's forces to Beneventum during autumn 275 BC revealed both the continuing loyalty of his core supporters and the challenges created by his reduced military capabilities. The 6 remaining war elephants, while still psychologically impressive, lacked the overwhelming impact that larger numbers had provided in previous campaigns. The handlers reported ongoing health concerns, limiting the animals' effectiveness during extended marches, while the reduced number meant that their loss during combat would eliminate this tactical advantage entirely. Roman defensive preparations around Beneventum demonstrated systematic engineering capabilities, characterizing their expansion throughout Italy. Dentatus had positioned his legions to take advantage of natural terrain features while constructing field fortifications, channeling potential enemy attacks into predetermined zones where Roman tactical advantages could be maximized. The extensive use of obstacles, ditches, and palisades revealed Roman determination to neutralize the mobility advantages that had enabled Pyrrhus's previous tactical successes. The preliminary skirmishing that preceded the main engagement extended over several days, as both armies maneuvered for advantageous positions while conducting reconnaissance operations designed to identify enemy weaknesses. Roman light troops operating with improved coordination and specialized equipment probed Pyrrhus's defensive arrangements while testing effectiveness of their anti-elephant training against the reduced number of animals available to their opponents. These encounters revealed that Roman tactical modifications had achieved significant success in addressing challenges that had frustrated their previous efforts. Pyrrhus's deployment for the battle reflected his accumulated experience with Roman methods, while acknowledging limitations imposed by his reduced forces. The Epirot phalanx occupied the center of his battle line, with the 6 war elephants distributed to provide maximum psychological impact rather than concentrated in single formation. Light troops filled intervals between major units, while tribal contingents were positioned where their individual fighting skills could contribute effectively without requiring complex coordination with unfamiliar tactical systems. The night before battle, Pyrrhus reportedly walked among his soldiers, these men who had followed him for 5 years through Italy and Sicily, who had won every major engagement, who believed in his genius and his destiny. He saw the exhaustion in their eyes, the thinned ranks where fallen comrades once stood, the war weariness that came from too many victories that felt like defeats. He thought about Heraclea, where he'd lost 4,000 irreplaceable men to kill 7,000 Romans who'd been replaced within months. He thought about Asculum, where another 3,500 of his best soldiers died to kill 6,000 Romans who'd been replaced even faster. He thought about Sicily, 2 years chasing Carthaginians, while Rome prepared, adapted, grew stronger. And he knew, with the terrible clarity that comes to commanders before decisive battles, that tomorrow would determine not just this campaign but his entire legacy. Win, and he might still salvage something from 5 years of Italian struggle. Lose, and the dream of Western Empire would die on this field, along with his reputation as the heir to Alexander's military genius. The dawn came cold and clear. The trumpets sounded, and for the last time, Pyrrhus of Epirus led his army into battle against the legions of Rome. The opening phases of the Battle of Beneventum began with extensive missile exchanges as both armies tested enemy formations while positioning their main units for decisive engagement. Roman light troops, equipped with improved javelins and specialized anti-elephant weapons, engaged their counterparts in preliminary combat, revealing enhanced training and equipment that had been implemented during Pyrrhus's absence. Then came the moment every Roman soldier had trained for. The war elephants advanced, but this time, something was different. The Roman cavalry horses, conditioned through months of systematic exposure to elephant scent and sounds, didn't panic. They shifted nervously, their riders maintaining firm control, but they held formation. This wasn't the chaos of Heraclea, where entire cavalry wings dissolved into fleeing terror within minutes of first seeing these creatures. This was disciplined adaptation Rome, learning from defeat and transforming weakness into strength. The effectiveness of Roman anti-elephant preparations became immediately apparent. As the 6 war elephants advanced under protection of supporting infantry, coordinated teams of specialized Roman troops launched concentrated attacks using tactics developed specifically for this purpose. Fire arrows, their tips wrapped in oil-soaked cloth, struck the elephants from multiple directions simultaneously, the flames causing pain and panic. Barbed spears with specially designed points were hurled at the animal's legs and flanks, the barbs ensuring the weapons remained embedded and causing continuous agony with every movement. Portable barriers, wooden frameworks that could be rapidly positioned, channeled the elephant's charges into predetermined killing zones, where concentrated javelin fire could target both the animals and their mahouts. Picture the horror for Pyrrhus, watching his most effective tactical weapon neutralized. One elephant, struck by multiple fire arrows, trumpeted in agony and turned back toward its own lines. trampling through supporting infantry in blind panic. Another, its mahout killed by a well-aimed javelin, went berserk and charged randomly across the battlefield, creating chaos for both sides. A third, wounded by barbed spears in multiple legs, collapsed entirely and had to be abandoned as Roman troops swarmed around it, killing the warriors in its howdah and finishing the wounded animal with repeated spear thrusts. Within the first hour of combat, half of Pyrrhus's remaining war elephants had been eliminated as effective fighting units killed, panicked into flight, or rendered uncontrollable. The psychological advantage that had won him Heraclea, that had terrorized Roman cavalry into useless panic, that had been the cornerstone of his tactical superiority gone, neutralized by Roman adaptability and systematic preparation. The advance of Pyrrhus's phalanx against Roman positions created the characteristic collision between pike formations and manipular tactics, but the tactical modifications implemented by both sides had fundamentally altered the dynamics of this confrontation. Roman maniples demonstrated improved coordination in their attacks against phalanx blocks, individual units working together to create simultaneous assaults against multiple sections of the enemy line, while their enhanced equipment provided better capabilities for engaging enemy formations at distances, reducing the effectiveness of the sarissas. The Roman response revealed the extent of their tactical learning since Asculum. Rather than attempting frontal assaults against the phalanx's unbreakable front, Roman commanders coordinated attacks against the formation's flanks and rear areas where the long pikes were less effective and where Roman gladius work could be decisive. The flexibility of the manipular system allowed rapid redeployment to exploit opportunities as they emerged, while the improved training ensured that individual maniples could execute complex maneuvers without losing cohesion. Then came the decisive moment, the tactical masterstroke that would end Pyrrhus's Italian adventure. Roman cavalry, operating with horses trained to tolerate elephant presence, executed coordinated flanking attack, exploiting gaps created by the withdrawal of wounded war elephants. Picture the shock for Pyrrhus's forces. Roman horsemen advancing steadily, despite the presence of the remaining elephants, their lances lowering in perfect coordination, their formations maintained through the chaos of battle. These weren't the panicked troops fleeing in terror at Heraclea. These were professional soldiers who'd overcome their fear and learned to fight effectively, despite the psychological pressure. The sight of Roman cavalry charging successfully provided dramatic evidence of their tactical adaptation, while creating psychological pressure on Pyrrhus's forces, who had relied on elephant effectiveness in previous engagements. The collapse of Pyrrhus's left wing under coordinated Roman cavalry and infantry attacks created cascading effects throughout his battle line. Units that had maintained cohesion despite heavy casualties began wavering when their flanks became exposed. The fundamental nightmare of phalanx warfare, where soldiers on the formation's edges, unable to protect themselves effectively with their long pikes, became vulnerable to attacks from unexpected directions. The systematic nature of Roman attacks, coordinated across multiple sections of the battlefield, revealed planning capabilities that matched their improved tactical execution. This wasn't improvisation or lucky breakthrough, this was comprehensive preparation paying off, years of tactical learning culminating in decisive victory. The death of several senior Epirot officers eliminated much of the professional expertise that had enabled coordination between diverse allied contingents, while the loss of the remaining war elephants removed the psychological advantage that had sustained morale during previous difficult engagements. The final phases saw the gradual disintegration of Pyrrhus's coalition as mounting casualties and tactical disadvantages made continued resistance untenable. Individual units continued fighting with characteristic determination. Epirot professionals who'd served for 5 years refusing to surrender. Italian tribal warriors whose hatred of Rome exceeded their fear of death. Tarentine soldiers fighting for their city's independence. But the overall tactical situation had become hopeless. the king's personal bodyguard formed defensive square around him, fighting desperately to protect their commander as Roman troops pressed forward from all sides. Roman pursuit operations following their victory at Beneventum demonstrated both the effectiveness of their improved cavalry capabilities and their systematic approach to eliminating enemy resistance. The coordinated pursuit, involving both mounted units and light infantry, prevented Pyrrhus from conducting the organized withdrawal that had preserved substantial portions of his army after previous defeats. The Roman ability to maintain pressure on retreating enemies reflected their enhanced tactical coordination and the confidence that came from finally achieving decisive success against their most formidable opponent. The casualties suffered at Beneventum effectively ended Pyrrhus's ability to conduct major offensive operations in Italy. His losses included approximately 5,000 men from his original force, with particularly heavy casualties among the irreplaceable Epirot professionals, whose combat expertise could not be readily restored. The death of veteran officers and the loss of all remaining war elephants eliminated the tactical advantages that had enabled his previous successes, while highlighting the unsustainable nature of his military methods when confronted by adaptive opponents. Roman losses, while substantial, were proportionally lighter and more easily replaced through the demographic advantages provided by their Italian confederation. More significantly, the demonstrated effectiveness of their tactical adaptations and improved equipment provided confidence that continued resistance by remaining enemy forces could be overcome through systematic application of the methods that had proven successful. As night fell on the battlefield of Beneventum, Pyrrhus gathered the remnants of his army and began the long retreat toward the coast. Around him lay the bodies of his war elephants, those magnificent beasts that had once struck terror into Roman hearts, now lying dead or dying, their blood soaking into Italian soil. His Epirot professionals who had followed him for 5 years, who had won battles at Heraclea and Asculum and across Sicily, now reduced to perhaps 3,000 exhausted, wounded survivors. His dream of Western Empire, of building something to rival Alexander's conquests, dying with them. The king who claimed descent from Achilles, who had never lost a battle until today, now faced the bitter recognition that tactical brilliance wasn't enough. You could win every battle and still lose the war when your enemy had more men, more resources, more institutional resilience, and most dangerously, the ability to learn from defeat and adapt their methods systematically. Within months, Pyrrhus would depart Italy entirely, sailing back to Epirus with the shattered remnants of the expedition that had promised so much and delivered only costly victories, leading to ultimate defeat. He would go on to other campaigns, other wars, other tactical triumphs, but he would never return to Italy. He'd learned the hardest lesson. Rome couldn't be beaten by military genius alone. The withdrawal from Italy in early 274 BC marked not merely the end of a military campaign, but the conclusion of the last serious challenge to Roman expansion in the Italian peninsula. The Epirot king's departure symbolized the failure of professional Hellenistic military methods to overcome Roman adaptability and demographic advantages when sustained over extended periods. And in Rome, the Senate and the people celebrated not just military victory, but vindication of their institutional resilience, their refusal to negotiate under pressure, their systematic approach to learning from defeat. Appius Claudius Caecus, the blind old statesman who had defied Pyrrhus's peace offers, was hailed as prophet and hero. His words had been proven true. Rome would fight, Rome would adapt, Rome would prevail. The precedent was set. For the next 5 centuries, anyone contemplating challenging Rome would have to remember the lesson of Pyrrhus. Winning battles against the legions wasn't enough. You had to break their will, destroy their institutions, eliminate their ability to replace losses, and learn from defeats. And no one in the ancient world had yet figured out how to do that. The era of Roman Mediterranean dominance had begun, born from the costly victories that destroyed their most brilliant opponent and taught them lessons about adaptation, resilience, and institutional strength that would shape their approach to conquest for generations. Subscribe to Colossus of Empires for more epic journeys through history's greatest conflicts that determine the fate of civilizations.